Well, brothers and sisters, I'd just like to ask you to remain on mute for the duration of Sister Izzy's share. And with that, Sister Izzy, would you like to come on in?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Darren, and you're doing a grand job. And my name's Izzy, and I am a very grateful child of God, and I'm also in recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous, and yeah, very blessed. But yeah, thank you so much for asking me to share my testimony this morning. It's always good to go through all that God has done in my life, and He's continuing to do in my life. It's never ending. What an amazing God we serve. So yeah, I was one of five children, and from the outside we looked like the perfect family, but in the four walls it was pretty hectic. My mum, God bless her, she wasn't an alcoholic, but she certainly had the isms. I'd say she was a rageaholic. She was extremely violent physically to my father, and verbally to him and to us children. And she was Irish Catholic, but I loved her. I really loved my mum, and always seeking her approval. And I love my father too, but we were brought up Catholic, so we went to a Catholic school, we went to a Catholic church. I loved hearing about Jesus. I loved, the thought that there was God, and my faith as a child was quite strong. Although, as things got worse, for instance, my father eventually left home. My mother had done some pretty awful things to him. She chased him with knives, she scolded him, all sorts of things. And I think she came pretty close to really seriously hurting him. And I think he knew that if he didn't leave, that she might kill him. And but I do remember sitting on my windowsill, seeing him at the bus stop with his suitcase, and something happened in my heart. And I believe this spirit of abandonment came in, and this feeling of not being good enough, because I thought, why are you leaving us, Daddy? I couldn't understand it. And I kept praying to God that he would come back, and he didn't. So my eldest sister had got pregnant and got married. She got pregnant at 16, married at 17, and left the home because she found it unbearable. My brother went into the army, so there was three of us left at home. And my sister, who was slightly older than me, so I had a youngest sister, I was the second youngest, kind of went off the rails and moved out and got herself a bed sit, and got into a very abusive relationship, and got into drink and drugs too. And my mum wanted us all to go to Ireland, so she was trying to get Melly to come with me. That's my sister who'd moved out, but she wouldn't come. And so we all went off to Ireland, and we came back to find out that Melly was in hospital, and she was in a coma. Apparently she'd taken what they called an accidental overdose. And again, I cried out to God and just asked him that, please don't let Melly die. And she died. And something happened in me. I remember where I was sat on my windowsill, and I just cried out to God, and I said, you don't care about us. And I turned like the prodigal son. I turned away, and I went on a path of self-destruct, up until I was 14. So I was 14, she was 16 when she died. I was always full of fear. I had panic attacks when I was at school. I never felt okay in my own skin. Couldn't form any healthy relationships. And so when I turned my back on God and went on this path of self-destruct, and my first thing I did was pick up alcohol. something happened when I picked that drink up. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt part of, I felt okay in my own skin. And I thought, this is what I've been missing. The ironic thing is, I was going to a convent school and I'd been doing okay at school, but then I obviously didn't. And I came out of school with 2 O levels. One was art and the other was religious education. So something was in me, that God had his hand on me. I absolutely know that right from the start. But I went to France to work for my brother's best friend, who owned a hotel, and he was from a very, very wealthy family. And I loved it in France because they drink a lot in France. So my drinking went up a good few notches, and I eventually came back to England, and my brother's best friend ended up shooting himself in the head. And I just remember thinking, why would he do that? Because he had everything, material wise, he had everything. But he didn't have our Lord. He didn't find recovery. I understand that today. Because, what I wanted to say as well, at 16, I took a huge overdose. This was before I went to France. Because I wanted out. I wanted to be with my sister, and ended up having my stomach pumped. I look back on all those times when I, was nearly dead, or could have been, where the devil tried to take me out, and I do believe that God had his hand on me. So anyway, I came back to England and ended up in this extremely abusive relationship. I mean, it was violent in every single way. And I learned to ride motorbikes. I just became completely off the rails. And I eventually kept going backwards and forwards to this relationship, but I eventually came out of it. And the reason being was because I eventually passed my car test. And again, I did so many things that I could have got into serious trouble with, because I didn't pass my car test for a long time, yet I bought a car and used to drive this car illegally with no insurance, hadn't passed my test, drunk. And anyway, eventually I did pass my test. Within 12 months, I'd lost my license through drinking and driving. And then at age 24, I hit a lorry head on and was seriously injured. And I was trapped in the car and I was unconscious, and I vaguely came round. I mean, the whole car collapsed on me. The glass came in my face. I had 150 stitches in my face, broke my jawbone, smashed all my teeth out, broke all the bones in my right leg. And they'd already sent the police to my mother's house to tell her that I was going to be dead on arrival. They were convinced I wasn't going to make it. But God. And it's funny, isn't it? When there's nowhere else to go, nowhere else to look, we go to him. And I remember hearing a voice saying the car's going to catch fire, and I just lay there and I just went, please God, don't let me die like this, because I knew I was trapped. And he saved me. And all I remember is somebody spraying the car, and then the next thing I was unconscious again. Apparently it took them 4 hours to get me out of that car. And I was taken to hospital, and I was in hospital for nearly 3 months. And as soon as I came out of intensive care, I was asking people to bring alcohol in for me. I didn't know that I was an alcoholic. I didn't know that I was addicted to alcohol, but that was the only thing that ever took the pain away for me. And so back on the merry-go-round I went again. I came out of hospital. I did go back into that relationship for a very short while, and then I came to my senses regarding that, but I just didn't come to my senses regarding alcohol. So I came out of that relationship, but my descent into alcoholism got really bad, really, really bad. And, you know, I look back on my behavior then, and it's like another lifetime. You know, I was in and out of relationships, I slept around, I had no morals, I didn't care about myself basically. And so, but I also couldn't sustain any relationships. And if I met somebody who was fairly healthy, it wouldn't last 5 minutes because I didn't know what a healthy relationship was. And it was all about how I looked, and I'd smoked loads of cigarettes. I was taking speed as well at this time, so I'd stay really thin, you know, and I was trying to fix this endless hole in my soul with all this outside stuff, you know, every substance I could imagine, men, the way I looked, you know, everything, and none of it worked. None of it worked. And I eventually at age 40, a friend of mine who I used to drink with started going to AA. And I didn't think, oh, you know, fantastic, you know, she stopped drinking. I just thought, oh, well, how selfish. Who am I going to drink with now? I had no idea how selfish I was. And I didn't think, you know, that I should be going. Again, that denial. I had such denial. It was incredible. And so I carried on drinking. And this friend actually and I, before she came to AA, we went on a holiday to Ibiza, and we'd had a few holidays together where we just drank ourselves stupid. And I just went, look, if we go on holiday, I think I'm going to try not to drink, because I was so, it got so bad. It was like playing Russian roulette. I just never knew where it was going to take me. So, and she said, okay, yeah, I'll do the same. Well, after 2 days, we were sitting there twiddling our thumbs. We didn't know how to interact with each other. And we went, well, should we just go out and have one jug of sangria? So off we go, had this jug of sangria. Can't remember anything after that. I came round at about 4 a.m. and I'd split my head open. I didn't know where I was. My shoes were broken and I was terrified. And I just remember staggering into this hotel thinking it was my hotel, and it wasn't. And I'm banging on all these doors, and you can imagine what was being said to me at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then this lovely couple took me into their room and cleaned my head up, and because I was blood everywhere. And they were so kind to me, so kind to me. And then I suddenly sort of started to sober up, and off I went. And I saw that couple probably 5 days later when I was on the beach, and I thanked them, of course, by completely ignoring them because I felt so ashamed. But when I got back to the hotel, and again, I don't know how I found my way back to the hotel, but I did. And my friend, you know, she said, oh my gosh, you look terrible. And where have you been? And of course, I hadn't got a clue. She couldn't remember getting back to the hotel. And I actually said to her, I said, this has scared me so much, I'm never going to drink again. And I couldn't move off the bed for 2 days. I had the doctor out. I thought I was going to die. And then bang, back up, out we go. And I've got a drink in my hand. And she said, I thought you weren't going to drink. And I went, I'm only going to have one. Not knowing that it set off a craving for more as soon as I put that drink in my mouth, and I was off and running. And it, you know, they say it's powerful, baffling. And what's the other word? Can't think. But cunning. And it is. And it's so where the enemy comes in, you know, and he was in my life big time at that time. I know he was. But God. And as I say, my friend came into AA first, and I needed to get to that place where I surrendered. But every time I got into trouble, I just want to say this, you know, which was, I could go on and on and on about the times that I was in those sort of situations. I would cry out to God, even though I didn't think I had faith. So faith is small as a mustard seed, and he's there. And, you know, it says, when you draw near to God, he draws close to you. And I absolutely know that today. But I didn't really realize it at the time. So every time I got into trouble, I cried out to God, and he pulled me out of my messes. I love Psalm 40, you know, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He also brought me up out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. That's our God. And it doesn't matter what mess we get into, if we turn to him, he is there. And I literally felt like the prodigal son, because when I started to turn back to God, I just felt he was there with his arms wide open, waiting for me to come back to him. Eventually I just woke up one morning after another drunken night, and I just lay there and I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And I phoned my friend and I said, can I come to those meetings with you? And she said, I've been waiting. And I went to my very first meeting on November the 21st, 2004. And something happened for me in that meeting. And the desire to drink was taken. And I know that was God. I absolutely know that was God. And the desire to smoke was taken. And I used to smoke a lot, even if I had bronchitis, I'd still be puffing away and putting them out and smoking them again. And, but I must admit, I felt like a peeled prawn. I was so raw. I was full of fear. I didn't know who I was. I was 40 years old in a 40-year-old body, but I was a 14-year-old who picked up that first drink. I'd never emotionally grown up. And the strange thing is that my friend ended up going back out, my friend who held my hand through the doors, and she never came back in. And I thank God that I chose to stay, because I heard enough to want what people had got. And as I started working through the steps, God came in really quickly. When I looked at the steps, some people say, oh, they saw the word God and it was like, oh no. But for me, it was like, oh yeah, I need God back in my life. But I've got to admit that my God, to start with, wasn't Jesus. But I felt God come in, and I realized when I look back over my life, all the times that God had been there and saved me over and over and over again. So, I started to feel the presence of God. But it took me, believe it or not, 10 years, I think it was, before I became a Christian, fully became a Christian and got baptized. But, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. But, God meets us where we're at, and he knew where I was at, and he was so gentle with me. And, when I look back, it's like I can see all the way the dots were joined, how he connected me with the right people at the right time. And I met a wonderful couple at a funeral of somebody who I really love listening to in the rooms of AA. I love the way he talked about God. And I had no idea that he was a Christian. And he passed away sober. And I went to his funeral and I met a couple who I call my spiritual mum and dad, who run a place in Worcester. And they invited me up after the funeral to go visit. And they showed me Jesus. They showed me Jesus. They didn't, it was like they didn't preach at me. They loved me. They gave me their time. They fed me, all of that. And I kept going up there, and I kept going up there. And then I started to, go to different evenings where they had speakers. And I was a bit like stiff as a board when it came to everybody praising Jesus. I was like this. Oh, I'm not sure about that. You want to see me now? I'm like a 5-year-old. I've got my tambourine. But as I say, it was a slow progression to come back to Jesus. And it was just amazing how he just kept putting the right people around me who were sowing into my life and sowing into my life. And those seeds got watered by him. And the couple who I'd met, Dave and Di, actually offered for me to run a cafe up there, because what I wanted to say was I started working for social services. So I was working with a lot of adults who had either addiction problems, mental health issues, that sort of thing. So it was right up my street. It was the best job I'd ever had, because obviously when I was drinking, I couldn't sustain a job for too long, or I found jobs that were very easy for me to fit into. And I met a really good friend who became a friend. She passed away, but she passed away after knowing Jesus. all these connections that God gave me. And I got made redundant, and I was like, oh, I don't know what to do now. And Dave and I wanted me to run this cafe. Well, I must admit, I went straight into fear, and I was like, I can't run a cafe. I don't want to run a cafe. I've never run a business. I don't know what to do. And I'd open my Bible and it would say, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. And I knew that God was speaking to me. Excuse me. And so anyway, God put the right people around me to set this cafe up at Top Barn Farm. And I know now why I ran that cafe, because so many people who came and worked alongside me ended up being baptized. It was his platform for people to come to know him. I mean, the way I ran the cafe was like Fawlty Towers. I don't know if any of you've seen that, but it was really, honestly, but people love the atmosphere in there. And I'd have, what's the lovely radio station, the radio station that I used to have on it there, I can't think, but anyway, it was worship songs and everything playing all the time. And amazing things happened in there. I'll give you an example. What happened was we started to run a prayer group on a Wednesday evening when the cafe was closed. And again, I hadn't got a clue what we were doing or what I was supposed to be doing, but I just felt it. And I was just closing up, and one of the guys who came to the prayer group came early, and he had his Bible on the side. And this man just walked in and he said, oh, are you closed? And I said, well, we don't have to be. What did you want? He said, well, could I just have a cup of coffee or something? And I said, sure. Anyway, the guy whose Bible it was went to the loo and he said, is he a priest? And I said, oh no. I said, we're going to have a prayer group. And he went, I need something. He said, I'm lost. And he said, I don't know why I came up here. He said, I just felt something bring me up here. And God brought that man to that cafe that day. He was suicidal, we found out later. And he'd been in the army and he'd seen atrocious things. His marriage had fallen apart. And he ended up staying at that prayer group. And he then went on to a talk, which just so happened to be the same night in the Well, which was literally around the corner. And the guy who did his testimony was an ex-soldier. And he said it was just like he heard his own story. And he came to Christ. It's those sorts of things where I know that God has just had his hand on so many, I see it. And he's an awesome God. But, and then eventually before that, I met because I said I would never get married. I saw my parents divorce, my brother divorce, my sister divorce. And I said, that's it, I'm never getting married. I don't know why people get married. And I started to see somebody in the fellowship who was a good few years sober, and I moved in with him. I eventually moved in with him, and then I got so convicted in my spirit at a Christian talk that I stood up on stage and I went, I'm not having sex until I'm married. I look back now, it makes me laugh my head off, because I knew if I didn't do it and get on that stage, I would think, oh, it'll be okay. Because I so wanted to please God. And so I obviously came home, and my partner was like, what are you on about? And I said, no, I can't do this. I can't do this, and I'm so grateful that happened, because we are married now, and we've got a very strong marriage. We'll be married 10 years in November. I can't believe it. But, and I've got 4 stepchildren. But, tell God your plans and make him laugh, because, and, I can't put into words the way that God has blessed me. And I want to share this as well, because this was such a powerful thing that happened, where God, I knew, made this happen. Now, I've never lived where I live now. I live in Droitwich in Worcestershire. I'd never lived here in my life when I got married. And my mum passed away, and my mum gave her life to Jesus about 12 months before she passed away. It was beautiful, beautiful. And the night she passed, she was actually in hospital, but she was in and out of hospital a lot. And I became her carer when she was at home, because she was getting more and more frail, and she was starting to get early dementia. But she'd pray with me. We had some beautiful, blessed times together. And the night she passed away in the hospital, I actually sat there and was reading some Psalms out because she was really restless. And they said, "Oh, she's not too great today, your mum. I'm sure she'll be better tomorrow." And while I was sitting there, the woman opposite got moved out, and they brought a trolley in of a woman who was coming in from another ward. And on it was this bag, and I'd never seen a bag like it. It just had Jesus, the living bread, all these beautiful verses on it. And I just thought, wow, I've never seen a bag like that before. And I thought I'd love to take a photo, but I can't with all the nurses in here. And no sooner had I thought it, then all the nurses went out and I took a picture of this bag. I think I've shown it to Stella, but I've still got it on my phone, this bag. And anyway, that night I stayed longer than I would have done, just till mum went to sleep. And they said, you can phone later to see how your mum is. And I did. And they said, she's fast asleep, she's fine. And I turned my phone off because I didn't think anything of it. And she passed away that night. And I look back on that bag being there and after she passed, I was grieving, obviously. And I just went, please, God, let mum be with you. Please, please, please. And I kept seeing rainbow after rainbow after double rainbows. Even my brother had no faith, bless him. Who knows what happened before he died, but he knew how strong my faith was. And he kept seeing these double rainbows. And he did say, there's got to be something in this, because he'd never witnessed rainbows like it, It was just so God. But, I've forgotten where I was going back to. But, oh yes, so anyway, after mum died, I was clearing out her flat and I'd lost the photographs of my accident. I've actually got a book of the police photographs of my crushed car, and my dad took 2 photos of my face, and my face was out here. You wouldn't recognize me. I was so swollen. And I started talking to God, and I just went, why now, God? Why have I found these photos? And it just, and I'd shown my husband the photographs. He actually cried when he saw them. He couldn't believe that I'd survived. And we both went, yeah, it's definitely God. And literally a few days later, I went to the park. We've got 2 dogs. I was walking the dogs, and usually I'm with my husband. And our neighbour up the road is a builder. Him and his wife and children live up the road. And I'm walking up the road on my own, and I look over, and he's got a walking stick. And I just said, what have you done to yourself? And he said, I've had a hip replacement. But he said, I had a really good surgeon. And he said, I'm healing really quickly. And I have no idea why I started telling him about my accident. I said, I've just found some photographs of an accident I had many years ago. And I said, I had 2 really good surgeons. I had one who stitched up my face, and I had another one who fixed my bones in my leg. And I'm chatting away, and I said, it was years ago. And as I'm talking to him, he suddenly looked at me and he went, where was your accident? So I told him, and he said, did you hit a lorry head on? And I said, yeah. And he went, me and my 2 friends were the first at the scene of your accident. And he said, my friend got out of our car, got in the back of your car because it was so crushed. And he must have seen your breath. And he said, they're alive. And he said, and I saw the petrol on the road. So the voice I heard was my neighbour's voice when I heard the car's going to catch fire. And he said that he literally ran around the corner because it was in a country road. It was a really windy road where I used to work. So there was nobody around. And I thought there was a garage nearby, but there wasn't. And he said there was a man that was coming out of his driveway who had a camper van. And he just went, hey, mate, you must have a fire extinguisher in there. He said, I need it. And the bloke didn't know what had happened. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I can't just give it. And he said, I nearly stopped him. He said, I need it now. He said, somebody's about to die. And my neighbour got that fire extinguisher and saved my life. And God showed me that man 32 years after my accident. It blew both of us away. We both hugged each other. I was sobbing, he was sobbing. And I just went, I don't know whether you believe in God. I said, but I cried out to God when I was in that crash. And I said, I believe he brought you to me to save me. And, you know, he said he did believe. I mean, I don't know how strong his faith is, but I meet regularly with his wife now, and I just love that family. But the way God brought us back together, so that not only I can share that, but so can he and the two friends that were with him, you know, and that's our God, you know. There are no coincidences, there's only God incidences. And there's so many, if we just open our eyes to them, they're everywhere. But so now I run an alpha here at home. I run an alpha online as well. So I can see that you're doing alpha, which is fantastic. And I've done it so many times and I get something every time I do it. So, you know, it's endless what God shows us, isn't it? And, you know, we open our home, we have a prayer group on a Sunday before the AA meeting. I sponsor a lot of women in AA. And, you know, I can't put into words my gratitude to God for what he's done in my life. You know, this year I'll be celebrating 21 years sobriety. You know, I'm 61 now. And my life started at 40. I was reborn. I was definitely reborn, you know, and he just continues to bless us. My husband, God bless him, he's had 2 major heart surgeries since we've been married. And, you know, it's been tough at times where I've been on my knees crying out to God saying, please, God. But you know what? I have to surrender my husband. I have to. I don't know how long any of us have got on this planet, you know, but I have to trust God in it all, you know, and his ways are not our ways. You know, we went through a phase of losing a lot of people close together in a short space of time. And God carried me through every single one of them. And he showed me that he was there. And so every day I wake up, I'm like, thank you, God. I've got another day. Every sober breath I take, thank you, God, that I'm sober. Thank you that I can be a vessel for you today. I don't do things perfectly, and that's okay. People in the Bible who were used by God were all imperfect. And I love the fact that when Jesus came, he spent time with the likes of us, you know, not the people who are holier than thou. But, you know, we serve an incredible God who loves us so, so much. And I could, you know what, I don't regret a thing in my life because God has turned it all around. It tells us that, doesn't it? He turns everything around for the good for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. So nothing is wasted, not a thing. And I don't feel that shame anymore. I don't feel guilt anymore. You know, through Christ, you know, I am made righteous by his blood. And you know, I love the fact that I'm quite happy to share what happened in my life and what it's like now, because, you know, my life has been turned full circle, and that could only be God. And I think I've been going on a bit, so thank you so much for asking me to share this morning. I'm half asleep, if I'm really honest, but I hope it's touched somebody, because my God has saved me over and over and over again, and I just love him, and he loves each and every one of us. He really, really does. So bless you all. Thank you so much for asking me to share today. Bless you, Darren. Thank you for your service.